Sharon Osbourne, the fiery judge of the X Factor, the unforgettable voice of the Osbournes, the woman who carried a kingdom of chaos on her shoulders and never let it collapse, was once thought to be unbreakable. She was the strategist behind the legend, the iron backbone of rock, the flamekeeper who held Ozzy Osbourne's hand through addiction, betrayal, and endless battles with illness. For decades, she braved every storm, cancer, scandals, heartbreak. And when Ozzy passed away, many believed that was the final cruel blow fate could deliver. But no, at 72, another storm has risen, fiercer still, seeming determined to drain the last embers of fire from the heart of the woman who once defied fate itself. The first sounds that shaped Sharon's childhood weren't lullabies. They were slammed doors, shouted orders, and the crushing silence left by a mother who never came home. Born in London in 1952, Sharon Rachel Arden grew up in a house where power roared louder than affection. Her father, Don Arden, was a formidable music mogul, feared by rivals, respected by artists, and merciless within his own family. Behind closed doors, everything was contracts, disputes, and discipline, so cold it left no room for tenderness. There were no bedtime stories, no arms wrapping her in comfort, only the scratch of pens signing deals, the heavy footsteps in polished corridors, and the reminder that love in that house was conditional. But the deepest wound didn't come from her father's iron rule. It came from fate. When Sharon was just 6 years old, her mother died in a car accident. One day there were arguments and fleeting moments of comfort. The next, there was silence. A silence that never left her. That loss hollowed her world, ripping away the only softness she had ever known. Sharon would later confess that in her house there was everything: money, power, connections, but almost nothing a child truly needed. Safety, gentleness, and the freedom to be vulnerable. With her mother gone and her father consumed by fame, Sharon learned early that survival meant resilience. She watched desperate artists and ruthless executives pass through her father's office, absorbing long before adulthood that fame always demanded sacrifice. "You had to be tough before you learned how to laugh," she recalled years later. By her teenage years in the late 1960s, Sharon carried loneliness like a second skin. While other girls discovered friendship and first love, she studied power, reading rooms and rehearsing how to hold her ground. The clashes with her father grew so fierce that by adulthood, father and daughter endured years of silence. Yet within this crucible of pain, something was forged. Steel. Sharon was not merely a victim of her circumstances. The coldness, the absence, the loss, all hardened into the steel she would one day wield when storms threatened to destroy her family. By the late 1970s, at just 27, Sharon stood at a crossroads carved from both privilege and pain. She had grown up in the halls of the music empire, watching power wielded like a weapon. She knew how to negotiate, how to survive, and what she would never tolerate. And then came the man who would define her life. John Michael Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy was 31, freshly cast out of Black Sabbath, broken by addiction, mocked as finished, discarded by an industry that had once worshipped him. His voice cracked, his hands shook, his eyes were glassy with chaos. Once a god on stage, now treated as a cautionary tale. Sharon didn't see a fallen star, she saw a wounded giant, and in that woundedness, she recognized herself. Their meeting was more than business. It was the collision of two storms. Sharon declared she would stand by him, not only as his manager but as his partner. The reaction inside her own home was explosive. To her father, it looked like betrayal. To Sharon, it was the first act of true love. Choosing Ozzy meant losing her family. She was cut off from the inheritance she had been raised to expect, stripped of her place in the dynasty, forced to walk away from the protection of her name. She knew that from the moment she stood by Ozzy, she was no longer Don Arden's heir. She was an exile, staking everything on a man the world had written off. Managing Ozzy in those years was walking a tightrope above chaos. The money was gone, the name was tarnished, the drugs were everywhere. Failure meant not only losing a career, but obliterating the fragile love just beginning to grow between them. Sharon mortgaged her future, her safety, even her sanity on the belief that Ozzy could rise again. She admitted later, "I felt like the whole world turned its back, and I was betting my soul on one man." There were nights she sat alone in hotel rooms, unpaid bills stacked like tombstones, praying the man she loved would survive long enough to make it to the next show. And mornings when Ozzy himself whispered in shame, "She saved my life when nobody else would look me in the eye." Through the fire, Sharon became something more than a manager. She became an architect of resurrection. She designed tours, rebuilt trust with labels, shielded Ozzy from collapse while fighting her own silent battles. In 1982, when she married him, it was not just a wedding, it was a vow written in scars. At just 30, Sharon found herself raising a family and a legend at the same time. She rocked babies to sleep while negotiating contracts. She soothed Ozzy through withdrawals while hiding her own tears. Critics had written him off as finished, but Sharon refused to let the story end in disgrace. Album after album, Blizzard of Oz, Diary of a Madman, Bark at the Moon, each became both a triumph for Ozzy and a testimony to Sharon's unseen labor. The Prince of Darkness brand was no accident. It was her vision, sharpened by boardroom battles and tested under the fire of arenas. But resurrection came at a brutal cost. Behind the fireworks, there was exhaustion. Behind the roar of thousands, there was silence broken only by Ozzy's shaking breath. Sharon lived between stage and emergency room, nursery and boardroom. Nights of glory ended with nights of terror. Ambulances were called in secret, bills stacked higher than applause. People saw the lights and the fire, she later admitted, but I only saw pill bottles and invoices. Even her victories carried shadows. When Ozfest launched in 1996, Sharon was hailed as ruthless, brilliant, the woman who had created a metal empire. But the world didn't see the sleepless nights, the strained marriage, the aching body. She carried not only the Osbourne name, but the weight of every band she believed in, offering them a stage when no one else would. Some called her manipulative and power-hungry. The truth was far sadder. Sharon was a woman holding an entire kingdom together with nothing but willpower and love. By the early 2000s, she stepped into a new kind of battlefield, television. MTV's The Osbournes was meant to be a quirky experiment, a peek into their bizarre, foul-mouthed, oddly tender family life. Instead, it exploded into a cultural earthquake. Suddenly, Sharon was no longer just the woman behind Ozzy. She became a household name, sharp-tongued, hilarious, brutally honest, yet fiercely protective. America embraced her. But fame is a double-edged sword. For audiences, the show was hilarious chaos. For Sharon, it was sacrifice. Television gave us a microphone, she later said, but it also took away our quiet nights. Ozzy himself would admit later, it was the worst decision of his life. What viewers consumed as comedy, the family endured as tragedy. Still, Sharon's candor made her irresistible to television. She became a fiery judge on The X Factor and America's Got Talent, where contestants feared her criticism but lived for her praise. She wrote a best-selling memoir, candid about cancer, marriage, and survival. And by 2010, she had secured a new throne as co-host of The Talk. For more than a decade, she thrived until 2021, when a heated on-air exchange spiraled into scandal. Overnight, Sharon went from trusted matriarch to public villain. Headlines branded her hateful. Social media turned merciless. Contracts evaporated. She later confessed, "I thought my life was over." Nights were spent scrolling through headlines that mocked her, then crying alone in silence. But Sharon refused to surrender. She walked away from The Talk with her head high. "You either live in shame or you live in truth," she said. "I chose truth." Yet, even as she fought the court of public opinion, another battle raged in silence, the war against her own body. In 2002, Sharon was diagnosed with colon cancer. Chemotherapy drained her until she could barely stand. Her hair fell in clumps, her bones ached, But still she stepped into the spotlight, cracking jokes, projecting strength. Fans never guessed that moments before filming she had been bent over a sink, wiping tears with trembling fingers. Even while fighting for her life, she faced another nightmare. In 2003, Ozzy nearly died in an ATV accident. Sharon, frail from chemo, dragged herself to his bedside and refused to leave. At the same time, her children Jack and Kelly spiraled into addiction. "Cancer was killing me slowly," she admitted. "But addiction was killing my family faster." The world saw entertainment. Sharon lived apocalypse. Yet somehow, impossibly, she endured. Jack later admitted, "She fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself." Kelly confessed, "Even broken, she never stopped being there." Ozzy simply said, "She held me together when I was falling apart." Her scars became her crown. But in 2016, fate struck again. Sharon discovered Ozzy's infidelity. After decades of fighting for him, the betrayal felt like a blade in her chest. For the first time, she walked away. Ozzy admitted later his actions nearly destroyed them. Sharon fell into depression, confessing she didn't know if her marriage could survive. And then came the night that nearly ended it all. Consumed by illness, addiction, and rage, Ozzy turned on the woman who had saved him countless times. Sharon later recalled her vision narrowing, her lungs gasping, her heart pounding as she truly believed she wouldn't survive. Sirens pierced the silence. Police arrived just in time. "That night broke me," Sharon admitted. Ozzy later confessed he remembered nothing of the rage, only the horror afterward. Most would have walked away forever. Sharon chose to rebuild. "I didn't forgive because I forgot," she explained. "I forgave because I wanted my family to still have a future." Slowly, through therapy and painful honesty, they reforged their bond in fire. Their marriage was never a fairy tale, it was a battlefield. And Sharon proved that sometimes the bravest act isn't leaving. It's staying, demanding change, and daring to rebuild. But time had its own cruelty. In 2019, a fall left Ozzy spiraling through surgeries and endless pain. By 2020, he revealed to the world that he had Parkinson's disease. His hands trembled, his voice cracked, his body betrayed him. Sharon sat beside him, steady and unflinching. "He's not finished," she declared, cutting through pity. Then came the pandemic. Both Sharon and Ozzy fell ill, their bodies already weakened. Sharon later admitted those nights were some of the darkest of her life, feverish and frail. She lay awake counting the shallow rise and fall of his chest. "I wasn't afraid of dying," she said. "I was afraid of leaving him alone in the dark." Even then, she endured. "We are still here," she declared, after they recovered. Survival had become testimony. But Sharon understood the truth. Time would never give back what it had taken. The only gift she could offer was one last blaze before the darkness closed in. That blaze came on July 5, 2025, in Birmingham, the city where it all began. Publicly, it was a concert. Privately, it was farewell. Sharon orchestrated every detail with military precision, terrified his body might give out. But Ozzy wanted one last roar, and roar he did. His voice cracked but burned, defying time itself. The crowd screamed, mourning and celebrating at once. "It wasn't a concert," one crew member said. "It was a holy rite." In the shadows, Sharon wept. She had given him the ending he longed for, not hospital machines, but thunder and fire. Just weeks later, on July 22, 2025, Ozzy's breathing grew shallow. Sharon never left his side. She whispered, "You roared until the end, my love. Rest now." He opened his eyes one last time, heavy with love, then exhaled and was gone. The funeral was a coronation in reverse. Thousands lined the streets, candles in hand, chanting his name. Sharon stood tall, dignified in black, though her hands trembled as she touched the coffin. "He wanted to leave with noise," she whispered, and he did. Since his passing, Sharon has carried herself with dignity. Friends say she has grown thinner, quieter. Nights are the hardest. The empty side of the bed, a cruel reminder. I was never afraid of sickness, she admitted. But I was never ready for absence. Yet even in mourning, Sharon transforms pain into purpose. She oversees Ozzy's legacy, directing portions of their estate to Parkinson's research, children's charities, and music education. She turned the proceeds of Ozzy's final Birmingham show into grants and instruments for children. Applause became legacy. She speaks rarely, but when she does, her words cut with clarity. Behind every legend stood someone who carried the fire when he could not. For fans around the world, Sharon's grief is a mirror. Her life proves that love does not end with death. It lingers in rituals, in memories, in the silence we learn to survive. Her scars, once whispers of pain, have become her crown. If Ozzy's roar taught us to defy the darkness, Sharon's endurance teaches us how to carry the light when the storm refuses to pass.